So hi everybody, it's T Falcon Napier. Welcome to the Oracle of the Self. Today is session number 49. Last time around, we were looking at the ChangeGrid results from the profile I invited you guys to fill out. And I think it was called the readiness and engagement. I think that's what we called it. And it looked at 13 different mission critical activities. Well, and we started clicking our way through some of the graphics, and we'll do more of that in just a short while. But one of the things that I mentioned was that in a group profile, we can run a statistical analysis. And while this is not something you guys may very well ever see again in terms of the oracle of the self, the explorer level sorts of stuff that this is really all about, it came up, and I'm someone who likes to pay attention to where people find their tension. The human mind is tormented by an unanswered question. So I thought, I'll go ahead and show you what I mean by the statistical analysis, and I'll actually use it on the profile you guys completed, so you can see why I want to do what I'm going to tell you I want to do. So there are many sections to the profile, to the statistical analysis. I'm not going to drag you through all of them. Just suffice to say, it's a lot of pages with a lot of content, and it can all mean something depending on what question one of our professionals would do that. To do group profiling, you have to be a consultant or a master consultant. So it's not something that people are likely to stumble across, because they haven't had that training. Anyway, one of the things that we can do that's very useful is I can say, okay, let's take a look at that set of activities that we were looking at for this particular profile. And then I'm going to ask the system to rank them from highest to lowest on a particular aspect of the rating. So, we ask you guys to assess yourself across 4 dimensions when you are filling out a ChangeGrid. So how big do you think this task is? So that's the size rating. How do you rate your ability? How do you rate your challenge? Obviously the ability and challenge ratings. And the last one, how important do you think it is? We put them in that order because we wanted to spell something people would remember. It is spelled sassy. So we call it a sassy score when we're working with our consultants, master consultants, and even the coaches. No, coaches don't do group profiling. Okay, anywho, so the first one I said, well, I'd like to know on the size scale, which activities did these respondents on average consider to be the biggest and which one's the smallest? Now, remember, our scales go from 0 to 12. And so we tend to consider anything 8 or above is high on the scale. Anything between, say, 5 and 8, or rather 4 and 8, we consider of moderate size. And anything that's 4 or below, we can say they consider that to be small. And so you can see just by looking at this that everyone considers this to be a moderate sized task, even tipping the toe into a large size task. And so that's what this set is all about. So all of the activities have sufficient size that people would be paying attention to. Which ones were the big ones, though, for them? Managing the level of productive tension in others, they consider that to be a large, relative. 8.3 is right on the brink of large, so right there. Managing my own level of productive tension, tied for that, and staying inside my green circle. So for whatever reasons, people consider these to be rather big tasks. And again, size is an expression or an attempt to assess how many resources is this going to require to do properly. And resources are things like time, money, maybe other true physical resources, energy, whatever it is you want to look at. Meanwhile, the one that they considered to be smallest in size is keeping my relationships free of toxic negativity. So that's not a very big deal at all. I'm glad to know that. Glad to know that. But that may mean you've already cleaned house, if you will. Yeah. So that's the size rating. Okay. Is any of that curious? Is any of that you're like, how interesting is that? Anyone?
Very.
Yeah. All right, so let's go on to the next rating. Now, this one we use extensively because we're trainers. And so when I look at someone's ChangeGrid, the activity list I know was something that was co-created with the client. So this is what they consider to be, critical for them doing it. And I might have guided it and refined it or whatever, but they already own this. And so I think they're hiring me to have maximum positive impact on this list of mission critical activities, or why they hire someone like us. And so here's where I found really interesting. When you rate it by ability, their ability range, again, 8 and above would be considered high. People have rated their ability on average as high as a 9.3 to keep their relationships free of toxic negativity. Isn't that interesting? That's the one where they think they've got the greatest level of ability. Walking the path, 9.2. Using my online ChangeGrid, 9.1. These are strong, strong scores. Again, everything 8 or above is on the higher end of the ability scale. That's everything except for the very last one, recognizing my authentic voice and my chorus of the mind. In all fairness, that's a 7.9. If it had been an 8, it would have shown on the high of the ability scale. That being said, the ability scale goes all the way up to 12. So 9.3 is nothing to be embarrassed about, but 9.3 is not a particularly high score in the high range, right? What about the 10s, the 11s? I would be concerned to see a 12, but you get the idea. So this is telling me from my perspective as a trainer is that my audience already perceives themselves as having a reasonable level of ability to accomplish every one of these mission critical activities. Even though they already have this level, these averages also indicate that they recognize there is plenty of room to grow. Okay, does that sound interesting, useful, anything?
I love this. Is this inside the system itself?
Oh yeah, it's the very last thing when you're looking at a change grid. It says run the statistics.
Wow.
It runs them on the screen. It's really pretty fast when it's doing it, but good luck printing it out. It can be hundreds of pages long. Yeah, it's massive. And again, for someone who's like pouring through all the data now to put together the right action plan, people always want to know, what's the scope of work? What are we going to do? What order are we going to do it in? How much time are we going to spend on this subject versus that subject? Who should attend this module or that module? Do we need a beginners and an intermediate and an advanced? Is it all, you get the idea? In our role as professional corporate trainers, that's what we have to figure out. Because if we don't figure out, if we don't get an accurate understanding of this, then what's the likelihood that the training program we ultimately put together and deliver is going to have that impact?
Exactly. That's what I
Right.
like about this here is the context. It provides contextual information so that
Yeah,
you can understand how people are meeting the moment, what
that's
they're
right.
coming to the table with. And I think that becomes more important. This is what's missing in a lot of software and apps in general
Yeah,
because they don't design for that, but there's a missed opportunity to take all this information of privacy that they're not paying attention to
that's right.
and really use it wisely, but instead they're using it to build more faster algorithms instead of saying how can we really make this engaging.
Yeah,
I
and
see
that's
this with
us.
like the simple things with even the Aura ring.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
yeah,
you
yeah.
pay $3.99 for this ring, and it tells you all these sleep patterns and things like that. And when I look at their API
Mhm.
of what they're tracking, they track everything.
Yep.
But it didn't give me any details about, oh, if you have cool sheets or if your room is cool, that
Oh,
improves your sleep. It just simply showed sleep patterns.
yeah, and that's a value, but its value is going to be limited. And so what we tried to do, first of all, talking about distinctions between the change grid and other psychometric tools, is that the change grid was never really designed to be a tool for the individual client to use. It was designed for the professional. So it's the equivalent of an x-ray, more so than it's a personality test. Now, that being said, when someone goes to the Oracle of the Self, or they go through some training as an explorer or a practitioner, well, they now understand it. So for them, they can look at a change grid, but you can't just instantly look at a change grid and know what any of it means. So it wasn't designed for the consumer. It was designed for the professional. Well, as the professional, I need this data so that I can create the right solution, deliver it all that way, but I can also use it as a benchmark. One of the
Mhm.
biggest challenges in being a soft skills trainer is that they're always going, what's the ROI? What's the ROI? How do you measure the return on investment for a soft skill? And I always said, well, certainly you should be able to measure some changes in behaviors. And that may be what's been done up to now. But I said, my job is to change perceptions. If I can help this group of people to perceive their abilities as being greater, or to perceive their ability as being less than they think it is, if they need to be humbled a little bit, if I can work with their perceptions about importance and challenge and all that, I can greatly impact what they fill their day with. And so I can use this as a starting point so that I can demonstrate to my client that we did, in fact, achieve the improvements in ability, perceived challenge, perceived importance that we had set out to do. All right. So again, this is the Oracle of the Self. So I want you to be aware of this, but I don't want to drag you down a rabbit's hole about what it all means. But keep in mind, because I know this, that you guys view your ability to recognize your authentic voice in your course of the mind, do you think that my audience would appreciate it if I focused on some of these lower perceived ability activities? You with me?
Right,
Right,
right.
because this is where you're kind of going like, I could learn more, I could grow more, I could do whatever more. Now, again, there's room on everything, but now we'll see how that all comes together by the end of it. But these are the things I'm thinking about as I'm looking at the rankings. Move on to the next ranking. All it is, same activities, obviously, but this time sorted by perceived challenge. Scale remains the same, but 8 and higher would be considered on the high end of the challenge scale. However, it goes all the way up to 12. So the most challenging thing you guys face right now is a 9.1, which is managing the level of productive tension in others. We got a lot of what do we say? Perceived skill there. We got a lot of people going like, it's not particularly easy, but it's not overwhelming either. It's not a 10, it's not 11, it's not a 12, it's a solid 9. And so when I look at these ratings for challenge, I know that these ratings for challenge are sufficiently high that they are at least mentally engaging. As the level of challenge gets higher and higher, we might go from being, mentally engaging, which by the way includes both intellectual engagement and emotional engagement, all the way up to physical engagement. It gets you actually in motion. So there's a lot of people who see a high level of challenge and still don't do anything about it because their attention isn't high enough yet. Now, you did have 5 activities where the challenge is 7 or is 8 or lower, 7.9 or lower, and these would now be in the moderate challenge range. The one that you consider to be least challenging as a group is practicing the art of caring detachment. Now, that is really a wonderful plotting because to really do a good job with the art of caring detachment requires you to detach.
Mm.
So I can't practice the art of caring detachment if my energy around it is as a driven driver. Driven drivers know nothing about caring detachment. So they're as attached as they're going to get, and they don't care. So it's the opposite of that. No, we got to be where caring detachment naturally occurs in order to practice the art of caring detachment. You don't find Zen by spending your time out of Zen, right? So,
Mhm.
so I go like, okay, this is actually too challenging, even though it's a 7.6. It's too challenging for this particular activity. And so, again, this is something I have to factor in as I put together lesson plans and all that. Now, the one ranking that ends up being most important is the importance ranking. Because what I say to clients when they look at this is that because the client chose these activities, the client or whoever that few people, that few persons, what's the word, that few people were was, whatever, um, that chose these activities. I know they're important to them, but that doesn't mean that they're important to the employees. So
Hmm.
so now we're looking at the population as a whole. And as much as I want to say that every one of these should be a 10 or higher, some of these should even be an 11 or a 12. Well, you guys are as high as 10.4 on the importance scale when it comes to defining activities. That's really good because, as you've heard me say, the most challenging part, the most powerful aspect of using a change grid is wholly dependent on the activities being defined well. And there's an art form to defining an activity well. So any old activity can be plotted, and the insights would be interesting, perhaps useful. But if we can craft the ideal activity, the perfectly phrased activity that everyone understands what we mean by it, now I better be seeing some higher ratings for
Hmm.
importance. You
Did we
know,
do a training on that?
well, yeah. And when we're talking to the Oracle, this is the thing, because the Oracle explorers, actually it's the practitioners, have access to their own online change grids. They need to understand importance, but
Hmm.
we presuppose that any activity that you choose to put on your own change grid, nobody's checking your work. No, but you're just sitting down of your own volition and putting together your own change. We assume going into it that it was important enough or you wouldn't have bothered writing it down. So there's kind of an inherent importance when you're creating your own activity list. Um, Maybe those importance rankings are worth exploring with a colleague, or maybe if you've got a partner in the world of tension management, they can kind of go like, well, why did you choose that for the importance ranking? Where'd that come from? Why is it so important, or why is it not quite as important? Um, and so to illustrate that, look at the bottom. The thing you guys consider to be most important overall was defining those mission critical activities. Least important was defending against manipulative messages that are directed my way. Now, at least everything is 8 or higher. So you all agree that all of these activities have a certain level of importance. They're important things. But to average out to a 9.1, I promise you there's some people who rated it below an 8 to have that happen. Looking at a different scale, or a different part of the statistical analysis, I could tell you exactly how many people rated every single element of it. Yeah.
This is interesting to me, but I always feel like I'm not answering the importance and the in the most effective way, because in my mind, and this came to me, I just came back from my personal retreat in Bali where I spent 7 days in total silence and leave me to my thoughts. That's
Oh, I haven't
quite
received my
scary.
post. I haven't received my postcard yet. I'll keep an eye on
That's a
Feels
scary
so
thought.
right.
it. Yeah.
But the I always said, like, what I thought would be important for me to think about even there, or to, like, in my annual review kind of thing, it didn't, once I was there, it didn't meet the
Yeah.
I would call it
Yeah, it didn't pass
criteria, like,
muster. Yeah.
right. And
Yeah.
so it was like totally different. I always think about that in terms of the me that meet any given moment is uniquely different than me that's actually in that moment, and then me on the other side. So I
Well,
never know,
exactly.
like, how I'm answering this question, which is why what
Yeah.
fascinated me about this is how, when you said, yeah, I give it in the beginning, and then I give it again, and then I give it again, because now contextually I get to see where the growth is
Yeah.
and how I'm approaching things, the possibilities of moving forward without the
Right.
same,
Right. Let
drama
me
during
throw
the
let me throw one thing in from what you said there, Brian, is that you were going like what you plotted or what was on your list. Um, I want you to think of it more about who was the voice in your head on at the moment you were making that list. It might still be Brian, but it's a different Brian than predicted what was going to be on the list before you traveled, or
right,
what
right,
should have been on the list. These are different voices in the chorus of your mind. They're all you. Every voice in your head is you. How it got installed, well, that could come from lots of other places, but once it's in your head, it's you. So, so this is what I'm going like, always going to go like, wait, who is that coming from? Which version of me is that coming from? Because I can imagine that if I completed my, made a list of my most important goals or whatever, and I am sitting in a railway station somewhere versus me making that list while I'm sitting on a beach in Bali, I have to believe the environment is going to affect um, how my brain is working at that particular moment in time. So,
Yeah.
what's that voice? What's that voice? Is that
Yeah.
voice that's got lots of cortisol because you're in an upgrade environment?
That's
Or,
a good point.
yeah, so I don't know,
And
but
there's
that
one of
seems like,
these activities that I remember, and I think it was a toxic relationship one. Like, if I remember the outcome, I was way out grid, like almost danger zone on one of these activities. I
well, yeah,
remember
yeah,
that
you're the centurion. Yes, you are the defender of the realm. Hmm.
one.
Yeah,
Yeah, I remember that.
protect.
I said, did I answer this right? When I looked
But you
at
did,
the
but
result.
Brian, or if you want, we can actually look at your change grid when we get to that part of today's call, and I'll go through it. But I would say to you, based on what you have shared openly on these calls, um, you have colleagues with whom there are issues at odds with one with
Yeah,
you, right? Okay.
yeah.
Well, right there, you're saying like, okay, what they're bringing to me, is it constructive? Is it toxic? Does it have a value? Is it whatever it is happens to be? And so a defense is going to come up to say, I'm not going to allow the toxicity that these messages might contain, these meetings, these conversations might contain, to actually steer me away from what I know my mission is for being
Mm,
here. You have to be a centurion, otherwise you're going to get sucked into the drama.
yeah.
So it may
Yeah.
very well be that that location at that particular moment in time was serving you very well. So everyone just always remember, the change grid is not a traditional psychometric tool that's trying to describe anything about who you are. All it's
Mm,
doing is describing how you happen to be perceiving a situation at a particular moment in time. We
mm,
believe that behavior follows that belief. So your perception of what's going on starts to be accepted as the current truth. There's a belief element that gets added to it that's going to lead you to particular behavior. It is easier for us to change behavior if we can look at what the thoughts were that led up to that behavior. What were the
right.
perceptions that someone held? If I change your perceptions, I can change your behavior. But to change someone's behavior without changing their perceptions, what do you think? Are they going to continue that behavior? Or are they just
No.
doing it because they're being observed?
Hmm.
That
Exactly.
whole when
Not
the
sustainable.
yeah, when the cat's away, what do the mice do?
They played.
Right. Or someone who's, if the only way your employees behave the way you want them to behave is because they know you're policing everything they do, you're not changing their actual behavior. You just added a burden on your own shoulders requiring you to police their behavior.
Right.
And
Right.
so, what good is that? Okay, anyway, we digress. All right, last thing I'll show you about the statistical report, then we'll get into something. I'm going to scroll through a lot of pages. These are all the distributions on the energy layer. How many do I have in each one of the energies? So those are all distributions, blah, blah, blah. Don't get seasick. Distributions. Yeah. Then after the distributions, I need to have the overall analysis so I can say, based on people's current ratings and their idea ratings, these are the deviations from the ideal location. This is their distress score, the workload to ideal, and the effort that's required. Some of these things are very easy to fix. Only one got moderately heavy, and that was about managing your own level of productive tension. There's a big deviation, a 4-point deviation from where you guys plotted on the grid and the ideal location on the grid. So that would tell me I got to put some energy into that. Okay. Yeah. Then the action plans. What am I going to increase and decrease against all the perceptions? And so perceptions are size, ability, challenge, importance, tension, and drive. 4 perceptions lead us into the change grid. And when we look at a change grid, we see 2 additional perceptions arise from that. And a whole bunch of others if you look at the other layers. But yeah, you can only do so much. Okay, that's the
Wow.
statistical analysis. Anyone's brain numb?
I
No?
love it.
Well, when we first showed this, I'm trying to find something else. Just one second. When I first showed this to, okay, I can't talk and do this at the same time. Just one second. All I'm trying to do is go to the change grid. Okay, here we go. System access. All right. I forgot what I was saying. You guys can refresh me if you feel.
When you first were showing people
Oh, yeah, yeah,
the
yeah, yeah, yeah.
different things.
I learned very, very early on that just because I find details and statistics fascinating does not mean that every human developed professional does. Did I scare off people in droves? I did. Oh, well, but yeah.
Well,
Okay.
I am a 5 on the Enneagram, so I do love my
Well,
information
right,
research.
right. Well, that's why I say that for someone to really do the best possible job of using the change grid, it requires equal parts of, of intelligence and intuition. And I never hesitate to share that I think I'm looking at everything far more from the intellect side than from the intuitive side. And so that's my, what I say, you guys will benefit from my insights, but you're going to suffer from my blind spots. And that'll be true for all of us at all times, whatever we're telling our clients. Okay, fine. Here's my wisdom, but here's stuff I'm clueless about. So take it with that intention. All right, let's see if I can do this. View profiles. So we got 9 responses now. I'm going to go ahead and view the change grid. Now, Brian, are you curious? Do you want to be our little subject for a personal grid?
Sure.
Okay, so again, we can use this now. I can either look at an individual. Why is this not cooperating? Fine. I can look at this as an individual, in which case I can see all activities simultaneously. Okay, Edie is saying intuition is intellect on steroids. You feel free to unmute there, Edie, and tell us a little bit about what you mean by that. You're in a place where you can do that. Yeah.
I would agree with that actually, because I am what one would call a highly sensitive person, which
Yep.
means that the sensory capacities get overwhelmed. And so I can pick up on things.
Yep.
But
Yeah.
again, I still equally enjoy the data. And that's why all these systems and processes and the discipline from the outside, it looks like these are things that help me function. I'm not trying to be better than anyone else. They just really
Right.
help me to function.
Well, right. And yeah, go ahead, Edie.
No, go T. I'll remember.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say that I think that it's also important to realize that both intellect and intuition can be the pathway to the solution the person might be looking for, depending on the given situation. So, for example, Linda and I have had 2 things happen in our household in the past, say, week and a half or so. The first one is that our car decided to have the engine light come on. And so I was near the dealership. I pulled into the dealership. They say, yeah, you don't want to drive it if the engine light is on. And so we'll call you a lift to take you home. So they're paying for all that. Thank you very much. But nevertheless, now we don't have a car. Well, we do now. They end up giving us a loaner. But nevertheless, it's now been 10 days and they still haven't even looked at our car. They're so swamped. They have such small staffing. Even mechanics, certified mechanics at Hyundai dealership, they're having trouble filling these kinds of positions and maintaining people in these positions. So, nevertheless, the car has been there. Well, when that first happened, you got to know that the chorus is going to start singing in your head, and it's not going to be a pretty song when something disruptive goes on. And you have to be very aware as you are applying what you're learning from the Oracle of the Self, is that your response at any given moment in time is in large part your choice. And so while X has happened, and I'm going to have whatever immediate response I have to X or reaction to X, depending where I am on the change grid, I have to know, well, a lot of what I'm feeling right now is emotional stuff. And emotional stuff isn't going to solve a single thing. And so how I feel about this situation is absolutely irrelevant and counterproductive. And so I'm going to set aside all that emotion, and instead, this is all happening in the car on in the lift on the way back to the house. I'm going like, well, we can do this, we can do this. We do have a golf cart. Rarely do we need to leave the walls of our community. So when it comes to routine activities of daily living, my golf cart will enable us to do anything we want to do, whether it's go to the gym, grocery store, the emergency room. Fine, it's all fine, fine, fine. Okay, so not too long after that happened, our heater decided to go out. And so we couldn't get someone to come and check out our heater. And while we are in the desert, you guys understand the desert gets cold at night. And so in winter months like this, it's not at all unusual for the temperatures outside to get down into the 40s, maybe even tip their toe into that frost kind of range, even freezing temperatures. So no, we don't get bombarded with Arctic blasts or anything like that, but it gets chilly enough that you'd like to have the furnace. During the day, it gets up into the 70s. I don't know how long it's been since we saw the 80s, but this is, it's not like it's an unlivable temperature range. Well, we had the unit repaired before, on and on. A long story short, when we found out how much the repair was going to be on a unit that is still under warranty, you can imagine we had a response. So 2,200 bucks plus, yeah, 2,200 bucks. So you can imagine what that does in that situation. And of course, there's going to be all kinds of feelings because there's coulda, shoulda, wouldas. There's how come they didn't do this. We find out that the reason why the repair from 2 or 3 years ago failed was because they jerry-rigged a part and blah, blah, blah. Our feelings in this situation are completely and totally optional, and they are counterproductive to what's going on, right? And so to me, these situations are where we need to lead with those intellect kinds of skills. We need to apply our logic and figure out what's going on. That being said, if I've got someone who hasn't gone through the kind of training all of you have gone through, where I can say, you know where you're at in your brain right now, and it is not your cortex. So, get back in your cortex, Bufflin maneuver, you got stuff you guys can do. I would hope you guys apply what you've been learning when you recognize you are in those situations. And hopefully you would be very puzzled by me if in those situations, independently or blended together, you found that I was all this emotional upgrade, angry, worried, blah, blah, blah. I would lose credibility if you found me up there. Is that fair to say? Because I'm supposed to know this stuff. So, so that's why whenever I'm around a situation that's highly emotionally charged, I immediately wonder, do I need to be here? Because the chances of me working with all these people who are way up grid and getting them to a better place is far greater than I have at this particular moment. It's easier if I just exit the situation.
Absolutely.
So, you choose not to have certain conversations. Maybe you do choose to physically get up and go, So that's that. So I just thought that those are two really good examples of when tension management comes into play, that you have choices, and those choices are going to very much impact your experience of whatever that's going on. As we sit here today, we know the house is warm enough, so the part arrives on Thursday. We'll be just fine. And Tom and Aja had extra space heaters they gave us. Truth is, we haven't really needed them yet, but it's wonderful to know that we have them if we need to do anything. And as far as the car goes, they gave us a brand new Hyundai Elantra sedan to use for free. So do I care how long they take?
What insurance company do you have? That's quite responsive.
That's not the insurance company. That's the car dealership.
Really?
Yeah, the dealership, because people always, we've been with them since we moved here. And so, they're treating us as well as they can. They would have given us a loaner the first day, but their loaners were already out to others. So our gal said, we're expecting a loaner to come back in, and Linda follows up, and lo and behold, the loaner comes in, and Melissa says, you guys can have it. It's for you. We're getting cleaned up for you.
Wow.
Thanks. You know, so
T, I don't know. I would almost like a session on intellect versus intuition, but it isn't versus.
right,
But
it's a
it might be.
continuum between two. Yeah.
It could be two off course, but
Mhm.
but I remember when my first book's on intuition, and I remember it was that intuition was almost like it was on steroids, that it was holistic
Mhm.
thinking instead of sequential thinking.
Yes.
And so that, yeah, with sensory, awareness, all of that, that the answer was so immediate rather than going through 1, 2, 3, 4
No,
makes
and you're
5.
absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Because
Yeah.
when you think about that, when we find ourselves in the center of the change grid, and this is very Oracle, the self subject wise,
Mhm.
when you find yourself in the center of the change grid, you are by definition at peace. You are
Mhm.
in balance. You are detached from what's going on. Again, you're inside the green circle. It may not be the perfect, but it's darn close. And so there you are. You have all these assets. And I think that state of being liberates your brain to focus on the logical aspects of what's going on.
Absolutely.
Well,
Absolutely.
there was an example too. My dad was extremely intuitive. He had no more than an 8th grade education, but he would do engineering feats that. So anyway, we had 20 steam engines. He would build them, and he would take those big iron, 20-foot high wheels off and put them on tires. And I remember 3 PhD engineers could not figure out how he did that.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
he was kind of a living example of doing things intuitively
Yeah.
without knowing. I mean, no more than an 8th grade education, but he did it.
Right,
And
right, right. Because we are problem solvers by design.
Exactly.
And so that's what survival is all about, continuous problem solving. And so it's great that he was able to move himself into a state of mind where the answer, we could say it just suddenly came to him, but nothing
Mhm.
mystical was going on. All
No,
this was happening in his head. And
it
so
was already there. And see,
it
that's
was
the important
already
thing that I'm
there.
talking about with the intuition, because the body records a lot when we're even beyond our awareness all the time. This is why people who don't understand trauma, the effect it has, how the body metabolizes that, and it'll spring up in the most inopportune time. So when we aren't in that green circle, you're not positioned to tap into that intuition. And for a person like me who's, sensory process sensitivity and has always had it, I can pick up things on environment. The challenge that I have where I get into trouble is where I allow it to overwhelm me and not remove
Mhm.
myself to where I can exercise the harmony and balance of the intuition and the intellect
That's
together.
right. That's right. Because
That's a real struggle.
you have to keep in mind that every bit of the power it has is yours. The
Exactly.
only place it gets power from is the power that you give it. And the sad part is that our power is finite. And so if we're giving it to a bunch of these external things, we're empowering all these things happening between the green and the red circle, or God forbid, outside of the red circle. Well, what power do we have remaining for what we're attempting to do inside the green circle? You know,
Right.
we only have so much energy that we can use in a day. And I get that, our capacities are far greater than any of us imagine, but from a practical perspective, we still get tired. This whole thing
Absolutely.
seems to be a given. So, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, Brian, we just have a couple of minutes, but this is your change grid. And
Oh,
so, yeah.
okay. So there was one way out grid.
Oh,
I
yeah,
thought I
that's what we're
remember
going to
that.
talk about. Now, activity number 3 for everyone is keeping my relationships free of toxic negativity. Now, it's
Mm.
great that you gave your ability a 10 because that's really the ideal level we'd like someone to have. I mean, sure, it'd be great if you were an 11, but not as long as you're viewing the challenge as being this high. So if
You
I
know
was
what I was
your coach,
thinking
we got to
about when
deal
I
with
when
this.
I when I answered that was the pendulum to do so keeps moving because there's so many different variables that have now
Yeah, of
changed.
course.
And so that's what I was thinking. So it is somewhat more
Yeah, but
challenging than what I'm
let's
used to
no,
applying.
yeah, let's be a little bit more specific for this. So I'll go into coach mode for you for this. So we can talk of this in general terms and lessons, but let's just get really focused on the reality of this plotting. At the moment you filled out this change grid, you perceived your ability as being strong, but the challenge of dealing with these toxic relationships even stronger. So there is an imbalance. The level of challenge is very, very high. Now, I don't know why or what was going on when you did this plotting, but that's where the conversational part of the work comes into play. So I'd have to say to you, Brian, we can talk generally, but what I know for certain is that when you filled out this change grid, your brain did something called transderivational search. Transderivational search is the process through which our brains add meaning to the variety of stimuli we encounter. So if we hear a loud bang, our brain is going to instantly go into transderivational search to add meaning to that sound. Was that a gunshot? Have I heard that exact thing before? Whatever. It calls our attention to it.
Absolutely.
So when we read something like, keep my relationships free, my relationships is what's called an unspecified referential index. That's in linguistics. If you guys at some point want me to tell you about the 13 linguistic violations and all that, we can certainly do that. But in your languaging or how we write something, we are intentionally putting in a word that is representative of a situation you have found yourself in, but it does not specify who, because we know that in your brain, you're automatically going to substitute the words my relationships with specific people or situations.
Right. And I was answering that from what was closest.
Exactly.
And that was the project that I was just, finishing, and why I needed the retreat. So those are the really different. So that's what the brain does, right? It's always take the path of
Look,
least
the
resistance. And
brain,
so
the brain pays attention to where the tension is.
right.
Because that's what it needs to do for us to survive at any given moment. So if we don't have a lot of things causing us a lot of tension, fine, the brain can go on to far more mundane sorts of tasks. But if something is in our environment and it is threatening us in any way, physically, emotionally, intellectually, doesn't really matter, we're going to respond in a defensive kind of way. Well, when it comes to this, I would want, again, as your coach, I would say, who is this my relationships? And don't tell me it's the other people on the team. The question is, who is this relationship that you feel is bringing you toxic negativity? Is it every one of them? Is it
No,
certain?
there's three in particular.
All
Like it
three.
just takes a
Did you guys hear how
lot of energy to
did,
deal with.
did you guys hear how quickly he was able to identify how many it is? So it's not my relationships, it's those relationships. So when we're using this for coaching or consulting, we got to dig for the specifics. Transderivational search adds meaning, but you don't know that your brain has just done that. It's happening instantaneously, automatically, whatever. We want to come in and ask for the missing information. So Brian, who are those people? What makes them so challenging? What ability do you think you might have to better counter that? Or maybe we should just do this. You need to spend some time on a beach in Bali because
Yeah, which is exactly the answer.
to
Because
be dealing with
I
this
went
right
through
now.
that. I went through that analysis that you just described, because then I was like, okay, I don't have this problem with family or friends, because I don't have a problem with telling someone where to go and a
How to get
shortcut if
there,
I need
right?
to, right? But with these folks, there's compliance, and then if I don't do it right, we could lose the grant and all these. So all this is going on in my mind that I felt like, well, shit, I'm captive.
Right, exactly. You're trapped on a ship of fools. What are you doing? So we get that. So sometimes, again, let's go back to this. Again, me in my coach mode, I would be saying to you, when you look at the verb keeping relationships free of toxic negativity, what specific behaviors do you think keeping might include? What, in order to keep your relationships free of toxic negativity, what are some of the behaviors you might turn to? Well, you've added a new one, which was go to Bali.
Yeah, yeah, and I would go inward. That's how I deal with things, because again, that sensory processing sensitivity.
Yep.
But see, then we have deadlines, we have to meet, and I have to meet with them because otherwise I wouldn't even meet with them, but I have to do that. And so I'm like, man, this is really challenging for me. And I
Yeah.
remember feeling that way. I keep journals. So I have journals of this and documentation. And I always ask myself the three questions as I do every day. Like, what did I learn? How can I grow? How can I develop? And I have difficulty answering those questions because it's a situation that I don't necessarily want to deal with long term,
Right, right.
but there's a higher purpose for these projects that goes beyond me.
That's right. That's right.
And so I
Now,
tolerate it.
for those of you that have got that use the ChangeGrid in client work, how many of you have just heard Brian go from one activity to a whole new list of sub activities that he may need to really focus on because of the unique situation? We could say, look, the easiest way to get that toxicity out of your life is to move on. You don't know these people. You don't need to know these people. Get on the next airplane, come home. Well, that may not be practical. He likes
Right.
to finish what he started, or he's got some contractual obligations, or he's liking the money. I don't know. But we can't just say, oh, well, then just ignore it, just go away. No, sometimes they're a family member and you're stuck with them forever.
Right. There's no
So,
counting to 10 in this scenario.
right. And so we have to go other things and say, well, when it comes to coaching, and this is something very good that I heard as Brian was describing his situation. Not once did he suggest something that they need to change. It was always
Wow.
what he can change.
Yeah, that's
So you,
always my thing.
well, it's the only thing you can do. I can't change them. Well, I mean,
Yeah.
technically I can, but it's going to take effort, and you got to decide, is it really worth the effort to do what we can do to influence another person to change?
Yeah.
So this would be very interesting to look at. Now, if you filled this out today, how do you rate your ability to keep your relationships free of toxic negativity?
My ability probably be the same.
All
The
right.
challenge would be different though. Like
Different. If we assigned a number to different, what would it be?
I would say the challenge would be more 8.
8. Okay. Now, who specifically did you have in mind when it came to these relationships that are far easier to deal with? I mean, obviously, we don't know these people, so you can make up whatever you want. But I'm saying the transderivational search still occurred. You didn't give us an answer based on all relationships you have that you've now carefully evaluated and averaged out. No.
Right.
Today the 8 is because the ones that were up there at 11 aren't around.
Yeah, there's one that I said, in fact, I just wrote about it in the journal in Bali. There was one that I could, it's not as intense. They're just difficult because they don't know.
All right.
So I can use them as an ambassador
Yeah.
with the others. And so
Yeah.
that became kind of like the game plan for me. So
Right.
that's why I always look at not what others can do, but what can I do?
Yeah.
And I found a way that I could basically use them as kind of like lieutenant or second
Right.
hand or
Yeah.
something.
Exactly. Or you've enlisted them. Right.
Yeah.
And
And
so
so
what
that's
you've
what I
just
actually
done,
did.
yeah. And so to a certain degree, that might be about increasing your ability because that gave you additional resources that you could leverage, but it also made the task feel a little bit simpler. And you're right, to be at 10 and 8 is probably the ideal location for this. In fact, maybe I said 9-9 because it's that whole keeping thing out. Nope, 10-10. So yeah, move you down to 1 point and you're in the ideal location because that's where the Centurion stands, protecting before anything moves the situation to a danger zone. How can we stop them before they do that? Okay, we've gone a bit over our time, but I just wanted you guys to kind of get a kind of a deeper look into what the grids are saying. In the next series of calls we'll be going through, I have to use the results of this profile you guys have just completed to put together what the lesson plan is going to be. And so if there's a specific thing you'd like us to cover that is appropriate for the oracle of the self. So these are really, while we might talk about applying this to others and more general kinds of things, ultimately this is all about people getting better at applying these principles to their own thoughts, their own beliefs, their own behaviors, their own interactions, that sort of thing. So this is about how they learn what these locations are saying to them personally. So that's ultimately what the Oracle is really all about. Okay, so
Who are
yeah,
you going to offer this to, T?
as far as
You said you were going to do something in the past with like the residents there, but this is going
yeah,
to be just open for like anyone that comes to the
no,
Patreon page.
no. Well, let me quickly walk you guys through the thing as we see it. I'd be very curious to get your input on this as well. But we want our explorers to, you guys would all be explorers. The Oracle itself is all about explorers. So that when I say explore, when I say Oracle, I'm talking about the same group of people, the same thing. We want to give them every week a change grid that they can fill out to help them look at a specific life area or life situation that we're all going to go through. And it's different every single week. People that are explorers would get access to that before the general public would. Then the next week, we would then do the debrief of that. And if we can cover all of them, that would be great. But I dare say at most we can cover 5, maybe 6 activities in a debrief session. That would all be live. You're on the webinar like this, but we'd be focusing more on you reading your own grids, me helping you read your grids, et cetera. That's what I really want, help people develop that skill. After that call is done and recorded, those recordings go up on YouTube, so the general public can fill out the same change grid and then can listen to the video interpretation of it.
Okay.
They don't get first crack at anything, and they certainly don't get the opportunity to be on the live calls and all that. So moving forward, everyone who's on this call would actually be someone who was paid at the Explorer kind of level. So,
Interesting. Is there an age limit?
no, no. The older you get, the more wisdom you get until your brain decides to burn out. Yeah.
Oh, that's soon.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah, I'm out.
yeah, I can so relate. I can so relate. But
That's
yeah,
hilarious.
ultimately, yeah, you'll see how it's all put together. You guys understand that you're an atypical group of people, and your relationship with us is also atypical. And so, but sooner or later, we got to get back to the structure of the business as we've mapped it all out. And I think now that we just decided to bite the bullet and just stay with Patreon, we've got all of our roadblocks taken care of.
So can we invite people for this?
Don't do it yet. But I'll tell you guys, in another week or so, I'm going to be saying to you, I think you all realize, I mean, many of you that are on our calls are licensed people. So you know that to do something free for the world isn't free for the people that are giving it. So you do have to pay for, hosting, and you do have to pay for editing and all that sort of stuff. So I would really be happy to generate enough money from this project to pay the operating costs for this project, because our tagline is true. It's information so valuable, we want everyone to know. So, so part of it is just going to be something that the general public can benefit from.
Have you thought of doing challenges? Like, there's the popular movement, if you will, with the so-called gurus, as they do 6-week, 12-week, 13-week, and different kind of challenges to really help people. But I was looking at some research in terms of peer-to-peer accountability, e-learning, and how people are now trying to build these platforms that bring those together.
Yeah.
What I don't see is this kind of data that you just showed, and the use of tools so that people themselves can use this. So it's still the guru-dom kind of approach. But these things are selling out. Like, people are charging a lot for these.
And we would certainly like to move this in that direction, but I would suggest, or I would suspect that before we can do any kind of challenge, people would have to be practitioners, because at the practitioner level, you get access to your own change grid online, so you can create your own lists, your own grids. That would give a lot more flexibility to challenge kind of a project. And we could talk about ChangeWorks journaling then too. That would be part of the project too. So are you?
That'd be awesome.
a quarterly one? Are you doing an annual one? Are you doing them both? So we've already got all that stuff. I mean, it's phenomenal when you look through all the archives, the stuff that we created for other purposes long, long ago that could be easily repurposed for this. So,
Very
but
nice.
we had to get this piece in place first, and yeah. So don't announce it yet, but sooner or later, everyone's saying, please, please, please spread the word. Let's get something viral happening. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, that's it for now.
Okay.
So, questions, comments?
Thank you.
Oh, this is
Thanks,
really
everybody.
enlightening.
Bye. Bye for now.
Bye. See you
Thank
later.
you.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Stay warm.
Exactly. Yeah.